And I've got some direct seeded kale. This was direct seeded in a cold frame. I got other kale that was direct seeded just, naturally sort of thing, no microclimate. And this kale is way, way bigger than the other kale. Remember, kale isn't something you grow. Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com, and I had a viewer comment recently, and this is from a viewer that's been with me since the beginning. And he's chosen to engage me in a debate, so I thought I would have a hard time resisting a good debate. So I thought I'd speak to it. And I don't have the actual verbatim here, so you have to trust that I'm representing his points accurately. I don't have an iPhone, I usually just write things down. So he said something to the effect of, why do you put so much energy into cold tolerant plants in terms of these domes and all that sort of stuff? And why do you put so little energy into heat loving plants? He said something like, I start mine indoors, I get better results than you. I don't understand why you do things this way. And so to speak to number one, or I was going to speak to the last comment first. I get better results than you. For heat-loving plants, the most important thing is heat. And I'm pretty sure where this person is gardening is hotter than where I am. Based on my understanding of, this person lives in the same province as me, and I have a pretty good idea. The guy's been commenting back and forth for years. Lives in a warmer growing zone than me. He lives in an area we might call the valley here. I mean, that's a fairly large part of the province, but in terms of growing degree days, and I would encourage this person and anyone else to look up that term. If you want to know them for Nova Scotia, type growing degree days, Nova Scotia. And it's a map, and it'll show various areas of the province relative to how much heat is generated over the course of a growing season, how much heat and how much sun, which is really the measure of how productive a given stretch of land can be, right? It's not about your zone 6A or zone B or whatever. It's how much sun is there, how much cloudless sunny days is there over the course of the growing season, how much sun is actually able to touch the ground, warm it up, and get things growing. There's a much more sophisticated equation to that. I even did a podcast on growing degree days. If you just type Maritime Gardening Podcast, growing degree days, if you want to listen to that, and in much more detail, and the mathematics of that, and so on and so forth. But where this person is located has something like 50% more growing degree days than where I am, right? I think where this person is located, it's what they call class 1, which means you can grow anything here. Whereas where I am located is class 3, is it A or C? I think it's class 3, which means moderate success. Certain things work, certain things don't. And certainly since I've been here, I've never had any real luck with peppers, and I'll own that. Not only trying to direct seed them in my cold frames, but even buying them as transplants. I can't seem to even, if I put them in the ground here, any time earlier than the summer solstice, they just it is a really challenging place to grow peppers. I've never had much luck with them. I think last year was probably my best year, and I bought transplants for peppers last year. I have not cracked the code of direct seeding transplants where I am here. We just do not get the sun. But I do get good results with tomatoes. So there's that. There's the growing degree days thing. The fact that you might have had better success than me. It's warmer where you are. Better place for growing tomatoes, better place for growing peppers. But even then, I had pretty good results with tomatoes. I mean, I don't know how you measure success, but I had roughly about 2 beds worth of tomatoes, and that's about all the tomatoes I can keep up with over the course of a growing season. From some point in August right up until I think October, when I had to bring them all in, I had tomatoes whenever I wanted them. I made lots of sauces and stuff like that, and I even preserved a good many of them. I basically had all the tomatoes that I wanted to eat during that time. And yes, it would have been nicer to get them in July, but I'm totally cool with beginning to get them in August. That's fine with me. The ease of starting them outdoors for me, on the scale I'm going, you got to remember, I got almost a 3,000 square foot garden. On the scale I'm gardening, you can only put your energy in so many different places. If I do something a certain way, it's because it's easy, right? Because when you're gardening on this scale, and I do everything myself, right? And I have a full-time job. 10 hours a day, I'm not here. 5 days a week, right? If I'm doing something here, it's because it's the only way I can do it with that schedule. And by the way, I got a wife and 2 young kids, and they come first. This is something I just jam in. Right now, I'm shooting this video. It's 6 a.m. in the morning, and I got to wrap it up really soon because my wife's going to call me in to go have breakfast, and then I got to go to work, right? So everything I do here is sort of just on the side. This whole operation is something I do on the side. So if I'm doing something a certain way, because it's easy. So when I say easy, I mean what I get out of it relative to what I put into it, right? Sure, I could put more into growing tomatoes and peppers, and I'd probably get more tomatoes and peppers. But I put almost nothing into it, and I get lots of tomatoes, right? And peppers, if I, at some point in the next week or so, if I don't feel anything's really happening in terms of my direct seeds, I'll go buy some transplants and stick them in the ground, right? Because that's easy. So I'm going to take you around and speak to those 2 other points about why do you start the cold-loving things early, and also speaking to the heat-loving things. Okay, so come along, let's have a look here. So why do you start the cold-loving things early? And I'm going to use kale as a good example here, but I'll show you a couple other things. This is kale that I started in a cold frame in March. Okay, and I've got some direct-seeded kale. This was direct-seeded in a cold frame. I got other kale that was direct-seeded just, naturally sort of thing, no microclimate. And this kale is way, way bigger than the other kale. Remember, kale isn't something you grow to harvest once and then sell in a market, at least not for me, right? Kale is something I grow so I can eat kale all summer long, during the fall and even in the winter. So, and it's something we eat in my family all the time. So this, what are we talking about here? 18 feet. So all along the border of this garden, 18 feet, I've got a kale plant every 16 inches. And these are harvest size now, right? They're, I don't know, maybe if you go down to soil level, they're close to a foot high. And I got enough kale that I can come out here with a bowl and snap off a leaf or 2 from each plant and fill the bowl and have a meal, right? So I start them early in the cold frames so I can begin eating kale as soon as possible, right? Let me show you the kale that was just direct seeded that wasn't in a cold frame by contrast. So here's that kale down here, right? And this I'll take a leaf off one of the biggest ones. Okay. So you can see the difference, right? Right, the kale that was started in March is much larger, much more mature. Right, this one here is going to be another, I would say, month before it's the size where I want to start pulling leaves off and stuff like that, right? This is still quite small. There's a couple of them that are a little bit bigger than others, but generally speaking, this is about the biggest, right? Pretty big difference, right? So I start the cold things really early so I can start getting them out of the garden that much sooner. And again, because I'm challenged with the lack of heat. Right, I want to get the most out of them. Let me show you a difference in contrast in 2 parsnip gardens. So here's a cold-loving plant, parsnip, and the biggest of them might be 6 inches high, right? And the smallest of them are smaller than that. This garden here is in a bit of a shade from this forest, and so on and so forth. But and these have been growing for a couple months now. Okay, I had a little bit of plastic over them very early in the season to get them started, but really they've been exposed to the elements the whole growing season. Contrast with that with the parsnips that have been under a dome right up until like the end of May. Look at these babies. Look at these parsnips. These were under a dome. Basically, this dome was over these right up until I think about the end of May, and I needed the dome elsewhere. So these are 3-4 times the size of the other parsnips. And sure, they got the whole season to grow, but I guarantee you these things are going to be, well, we'll see, but I think these are going to be enormous by the fall. These are going to be in the ground till November, so these things are going to be monsters. They'll just keep growing as far as I know, right? And here's another example. Look at these beets. I mean, beets are something I start harvesting, in July. I'm already getting the beet greens out of them. Look at these beet greens that had they basically had this dome on them right up until the end of May. And I took the dome and put it over here and planted some cucumbers. Here's some beets over here, by contrast, that weren't planted under a dome. I mean, they'll catch up and they'll be all right, right? But these ones over here are going to be ready to use, and so on. And I'm already taking greens out of here already. I'm already eating out of this garden because I have to thin them, right? So this one is actually feeding me. Same with this garden over here. Again, a cold-loving plant, but Swiss chard takes a while to get going. This was lettuce and Swiss chard, and then I took all the lettuce except a little bit bolted. And there was spinach here as well. Now I'm down to the Swiss chard. I get a full bed of Swiss chard now, which whenever I pick greens, I grab, a leaf or two off. I use that cut and come again approach. Take a leaf or two off each plant, so I've got plenty of greens. I mean, the reason I start all my greens so darn early is so I can start eating them right away as soon as possible. Right? If I hadn't have started them really early, they wouldn't be this size right now. They'd be more the size of those beets I just showed you, the smaller beets, which are not really harvestable. So my greens are harvestable now, and the reason I start them super early is so they can be harvestable by now, so I can start eating food out of my garden and stop buying so much groceries. And over here, these are broccolini, and these were sown under that dome very early in the year, like late March, early April. And then I moved them when I needed to. I planted eggplant underneath this dome. And the florets are starting to form on these. So I mean, these are going to start giving me broccoli quite soon, I think. I don't think if I direct seeded these they'd be anywhere near this stage, right? They're a foot high. Now let's take a look at some of the heat-loving things that I got going on in here. All right, here's a cucumber garden. These are pickling cukes. They've been under this plastic the whole time, and they're a pretty good size, right? Some of them got taken out by slugs, so I had to replant, but a good many of them have come in and they're doing really good. And I'm going to leave this dome on probably until first or second week of July, just to keep giving these things that edge in heat. Over here I got zucchini. Look at these babies. Look at the size of my zucchini in a lousy growing zone. These ones were planted end of May, and these ones got taken out by slugs, so I had to replant. So you can see the difference in size. End of May, and basically I planted these when just about everyone would be planting zucchini, right? Which was middle of June sort of thing. So you can see the difference in how much further along the end of May ones are, right? They're doing really good. These kale-looking things right here are actually what they call tree collards. They take quite a long time to grow, and but they get really big. So I had these growing under a little plastic box sort of thing. But once I have a string of rainy days, I got to take these and space them out. Over here in this garden, I've got some spinach growing, and when the spinach is done, I'm basically going to leave. This is kohlrabi, and this is tree collards. When the spinach is done, or when it looks like we've got a really good stretch of rainy days, I'll take these plants and I'll space them out in this bed, and also jam them in with the kale over there, right? And they'll get lots of room. There's always something going on. There's always something developing. Just more greens. We eat a ridiculous. Remember, there's 4 people in my family. We eat a lot of greens, and this is where we get them. I don't want to buy them, right? This is a cold frame where I planted peppers. And you can't see it, but there's a couple in here that are maybe an inch or so high. That patch of green there is a blackberry that's poked its way, found its way into the garden. That's got to go. So yeah, I'm just being full disclosure here. The peppers aren't looking very promising, and that is a recurrent issue here. I think there's, they really have to be brought along and babied, and the moisture level has to be just right, and so on. I think I've got some heat here, but I don't know if I've got that. Perhaps there's no successful way to start these outside. Maybe I just don't have the right conditions. I don't know, but I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to try every year, and if I fail, I just go and buy the transplants, right? So you got me on peppers, because there's a couple I can see here that have shot up, and I think mainly the main problem is that I've not kept it consistently watered here. Right, I have to water this by hand, and I hate doing that. I've hardly done any watering at all in my garden this season. And so some of these peppers have poked up, But we'll see how it goes. Over here I got a bit of an experiment. This is, you can't see for the weeds, but there are eggplant growing here. These plants along here, this is eggplant, direct seeded. And they're maybe 2-3 inches high right now. And I've had to use a bit of slug bait because the slugs seem to like them. Down the middle I've got basil and some stuff like that growing. At least I think it's basil. Unless it's been all taken out by slugs. But anyway, down the middle I've got herbs, that's the plan. And on the sides I've got the eggplant. And pretty good germination, and yeah, it's nothing to write home about at this stage in the year, but I'm going to leave this dome on for as long as I think the plants can take it, and see what happens. My whole family, we love eating eggplant. And again, I don't have a transplant set up in my house, nor do I want one, so I'm keen to direct seed and see how it can work under a dome like this. In previous years I've just bought them as transplants and stuck them in the ground. There was one year I direct seeded them under a microclimate and they came in really good, and then I left one night a rabbit got in my garden. I think it was a rabbit because they all disappeared one night. Which I can't see a slug doing that kind of damage. I had like 24 of them, and they were quite small at that point in time, maybe 4 or 5 inches high, and they all disappeared in one night. So that was kind of discouraging. Anyway, these are growing. Seems to be working, so we'll see what happens. Out here, I'm in the part of the garden that's outside the enclosure. I got some heat-loving squash that I started on these cloches. They're coming along just great. About half of these got taken out by slugs, so I had to replant. That's what the cloches are there for. And I actually used up all of those seeds. That's that Georgia some of these are Georgia Candy Roaster, and I had to replace some of them with Blue Hubbard seeds. That's a shame because Candy Roaster is supposed to be delicious. Also, I don't think I'll be able to save the seeds because there's other things growing in with it. The likelihood of cross-pollination is high. Anyway, good size, right? And in terms of the diameter of that plant spread, I'd say it's a good 6-7 inches right now, right? Same with that one over there. And finally my tomatoes, which is I think the thing that started this whole debate, right? I'm looking at my tomatoes saying, my tomatoes are better than yours, right? And that may be the case. But I've got so just this stretch right here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I got 7 tomatoes right there. So in this garden, on this, there's basically 20 tomatoes a side. And they're not all going to stay here. They're going to be spaced out considerably, so these will be moved elsewhere. So this is one bed of tomatoes, but if I want, I can move these around and make these tomatoes into 3 beds of tomatoes once they're moved to other places, right? Sometime in July on a nice rainy day, when I've got a number of rainy days ahead, I will pluck some of these out and move them to other places. And unlike transplants started indoors, these will adapt to their new home in a matter of days and get back to growing because they've been outside their entire life. So yeah, I'm really not worried about whether I'm going to get a yield. I'm pretty sure that's going to take care of itself. I think I'm going to get pretty good results from these tomatoes in this garden in particular. Anyway, that's my side of it. I mean, if you're still unconvinced, well, maybe you're right. You know, I think it's very possible that starting them indoors and getting an early start and going through all the effort of hardening them off and moving them out, it's very possible that you get a yield earlier and for longer by doing that. But I would argue wholeheartedly that what I'm doing here is easier. You put the seed in the ground, you water it, put a dome over it, just let things happen, right? The sun does all the sunning, the rain does all the raining, and the soil has everything you need. And some of those you move to elsewhere in the garden, like a transplant, and some of them stay where they are. And the ones that stay where they are, they grow like you wouldn't believe, and they catch up to transplants. Now, if you've got a transplant that you just moved outside and it's 3 feet high and it's healthy and somehow you can get that thing, I mean, I haven't seen much evidence that that's when a plant gets to that size indoors, you got to really know what you're doing, let's put it that way. To grow it that big indoors and successfully transition it to being outdoors in the ground. A lot of people I've seen try that, you move it out and the plant suffers immensely, right? For some reason transplants seem to do better when they're moved out when they're small. there's just less adaptation needed, and they're less likely to be root bound and all that sort of stuff. And perhaps more adaptable when they're small like that. Anyway, that's where I'm coming from. I'm not saying change what you're doing. If you like what you're doing and it works for you, do it. But this works for me, and it makes sense for where I am and under the growing conditions that I'm working with here. Yeah, I hear you. So that's my wife calling me in. So I guess it's breakfast time. So I hope you enjoyed this video and gave you something to think about. And if you enjoyed it, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, MaritimeGardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.